Okay, shall we make a start as we have 36 people? That is fantastic. So welcome everybody to the second in our series, what I hope will be an ongoing series of events in Sussex around continuing the anti-racism movement. A number of us working in Sussex were very inspired by the work that the college were doing and wanted to progress it in Sussex. So this is our second event. So I know a number of people went to the first one, but we've got some additional people this time. So you are all very welcome. For those people who don't know me, I'm Vicky Baker, and I am lucky and privileged to lead the speech and language therapy service in Sussex Partnership. And I'm also a clinical director and a trustee for the College of Speech and Language Therapists. I'm just going to ask the other presenters and hosts today to introduce themselves. So Charlie, are you there, Charlie?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, I'm Charlie Harris, and I'm the professional lead for adult speech and language therapy with Sussex Community Foundation Trust, and I'm going to be one of the facilitators of the breakout groups, but I'm not actually presenting. But hello, everybody.
Thanks, Charlie. And Kamini?
I've spoken already. Kamini Gazhot, I'm Chief Executive at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists.
Senlika?
Hi all, I'm Senlika, and I'm an independent speech and language therapist across Sussex, Surrey and London. And I also chair the SEN in specific learning difficulties.
Thanks, Senlika. And Sahar, unfortunately, has got COVID, but was going to be presenting today and has very much been part of co-producing this workshop. And Sahar is one of the people that set up Speech and Language Therapy Tea Time. Padigan?
Hi everyone, I'm Podrigan O'Flynn. I am the External Affairs Officer at the RCSLT, and I will be presenting today with Derek on intersectionality.
And last but not least, Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek. I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Royal College, and we should also name check Ilya and Maya from the Anti-Racism Reference Group, who've worked with Podrigan and I on our presentation.
Thanks, Derek. And also, before I don't want to forget, I want to thank Jasmine as well, who's been working from the events team at college, who has helped us to put this together, as has Charlotte, who's my PA. Both have been key in helping us put together this event. So thank you to them as well. And you'll probably see them popping in and out of various things. So I go on the next slide. So the plan today is, after I've just done a few initial slides, is for Kamini to talk about the work of the College of Speech and Language Therapists around the anti-racism movement and what we're doing as a college. And then we'll have a bit of opportunity to think about where we're at in Sussex as speech and language therapists, where we're at personally, where we're at in our teams, what impact the last event happened, what barriers we're having. So a bit of a taking stock of where we're at as a professional group in Sussex. And then we're going to do some specific work on what it means to be an allies and allyship, and then taking that forward to intersectionality. And at the end, a bit like we did last time, we're going to come together and create a jam board about what we're going to do next. And that's going to be really important, not just for us in Sussex, but also in terms of how we can inform the next steps of the profession, and some work that I'm sure Kamini will talk about how we potentially can influence this work in a much wider scale and involve other professional groups. Okay, next slide, Charlotte, please. So just some reminders, and these are the slides that we used when we did the main anti-racism event at college last year, but there's no hierarchy here. Everybody here has something important to say, to feel, to contribute. We want to create, even though I know it's an online and it's we're in this virtual world, but to try and create an environment where people feel confident and safe to share their thoughts and experiences. We're not expecting people here to be experts in all discussion areas. We're just really glad that you found the time in people's incredibly busy and stressful lives to be here, and how important it is for us to be here and continue this work. And always to remember that you're sharing spaces with people that will have direct experience of racism in their personal lives and in the workplace. And each group will have a facilitator. Next slide, please. And I guess this is still feels like we're beginning and continuing the conversation, that everybody should be having what we're describing as uncomfortable conversations about race and inequality, because we know that this subject area is often avoided, as people don't want to feel uncomfortable or worry. They worry they're going to say the wrong thing or they're going to offend people. However, not having the conversation at all or addressing it contributes to the problem. And if people come from a stance of openness and wanting to learn about this issue, then meaningful conversations are far more likely to happen, and that they need to happen for meaningful change to occur. And that's why we're here. Next slide. So I guess we are wanting to acknowledge that this topic and the topics we talk about today may bring out uncomfortable feelings in the room, but it's important to share those and ask people about how they're feeling and their own feelings of uncomfortableness, and that it's okay to be uncomfortable together. So with that in mind, Kamini, do you want to talk to us about the work that college are doing around this?
Well, thanks so much, Vicky. So, and thank you to all of you for attending. I agree with Vicky. We're very aware that you're all under a huge pressure, and we appreciate the time that you're giving to this very important issue. So for those of you who may not be aware, we've been doing work on diversity for years, but actually within 2020, our work on anti-racism, equality, diversity and inclusion was actually galvanised by the challenge that was rightly posed by the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm going to hopefully highlight how we're committed as an organisation and a profession to both short and long-term changes. From that time, back in the summer of 2020, when we met with members, I hosted a sort of open Zoom call. We worked with members over a period of time to really identify what the priority areas were. And these fell into some key themes, really, which were supporting our members to be actively anti-racist, which you're going to be talking about today, looking at diversity in the workforce and what we can do to remove barriers and improve diversity, how we support the profession to meet the needs of diverse populations and make that everyone's business, but also looking at the internal leadership of the RCSLT, so the governance structure. I'm not going to go into the progress against all of those areas. We do have an anti-racism reference group, and we report progress on those areas on a regular basis. The next meeting is actually on the 19th of May between 3 and 3:30. So if you want to come along, do put your email in the chat box and we'll make sure that you get an invitation. And just to say that it's not a one-way information provision meeting, it's very much a discussion. As Vicky said, we know we're on a journey, and this is all about co-production and us working together. You know, we don't have all the answers, as I think was on one of the slides. We just need to feel our way together. So I do hope that some of you can come along. So in terms of some of the things I just wanted to bring to your attention, if you're not aware, we've created a diversity, inclusion and anti-racism hub on our website. Now, we're thrilled because many of you have helped us to build the resources on that website, whether that's around ideas around clinical practice, various anti-racism reading lists that have been member curated, issues around workforce, evidence-based journal articles, and other sorts of resources, some of which we've also produced. So for example, a self-audit tool, which helps you to look at health inequalities, as well as case studies that we're asking people to send us when they've used that tool to see how they tackle health inequalities and look at culturally sensitive care in practice. So if you're not aware of that, please do go and have a look. In the bulletin, we publish regular personal testimonies about the lived experience from those from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, as well as other groups who are underrepresented. And we're carrying thought leadership articles about anti-racism, diversity, equality and allyship. And it's good to see that some of those themes are areas that you're going to be talking about today. With respect to our internal leaderships, that's the governance structure of the organisation. So the organisation is a charity. We have a board and a committee. So the board of trustees are mostly made up of speech and language therapists. So very much open to any of you to apply. And what was really great is in November last year, members voted to change the memorandum and articles of association so that a key barrier that was identified from an externally commissioned report, which was that of elections, that was removed. The board have now established a nominations committee to create this diversity that we want to see on our board and committees. And we actually got 21 vacancies coming up. So we're going to soon be advertising. So do keep a lookout for those. We're also actively supporting members, again, from a range of underrepresented groups to attend the Allied Health Professions Federation Leadership Programme. And I know that some of you on this call today are actually on that programme or have just completed it. So, and the feedback we've had is it's really good, and it's a really positive programme to go on. So we're very much looking at the pipeline for the next generation of people who can come onto our governance structures. So going on to some of the plans going forward, we're very aware, as I'm sure all of you are, that we are not accountable, nor do we hold the levers for change for all the things that need to happen to tackle institutional racism, whether that's in the universities and the experiences of our students or within the NHS. And I know we do have members here from the independent sector who may also be working in a whole range of settings, whether that's schools or other sorts of organisations. But we're building those partnerships that we need to build. So we're working with the Council of Deans for Health. We've been having regular meetings with our universities, and we're also got a meeting coming up with NHS England on Monday to really delve into further how we can work, particularly on rolling out this sort of training, just as an example of what we're trying to do. It's really important that we mainstream this, isn't it? Because there's a risk that it becomes very reliant, any of the work that we do becomes reliant on single individuals rather than looking at the institutional elements of it and looking at how we can build this into systems and processes, whether that's through appraisals or induction training. So that's one of the things that we're looking to do. So as I said, we've started the journey. We know it's going to take time. And an acknowledgement of that, the new 5-year RCSLT strategic vision includes equality, diversity and inclusion as the first area of focus. It's embedded throughout our operational plan for this year. And so we're absolutely thrilled that all of you are taking some of this work forward at a local level, actively tackling the issues that we've highlighted. And we do hope that other areas will follow suit, and we look forward to your ongoing engagement and involvement. So thank you so much, and thank you, Vicky, for your leadership.
Thank you, Kamini. Are there any questions for Kamini while she's here? Because she's going to have to go off in a minute. Any questions from anybody about the work we're doing?
Vicky, did you want me to come back at the end if I can? What time would it be? If you
yeah, whatever. What time would that be, Jazz? Just 10 minutes before the final end, I guess, when we're going to pull everything together.
Yeah, so 3:55 would be great.
Okay, I'll let someone know. I'll run late for another meeting. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'll join you right at the end. Okay, lovely. See you later. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go out into our breakout groups. But before we do that, Jazz is going to tell us how the Jamboard works, because the Jamboard theme is something we're going to be doing throughout the breakout groups to collate our thoughts and ideas. So Jazz, do you want to talk about that now?
Yes, of course. I can't turn my camera on, so I'm having my own technical difficulties, but I'll send a link in the chat in a moment. And then for anybody that's not familiar with the Jamboard, I'll just quickly show you what it looks like. So let me just share my screen. So as you click the link, you'll see this page here. And as the conversations progress and we go clicking the arrow at the top here, hopefully you can all see that.
I don't think we can. Well, I can't, Jazz. I don't know about other people.
I can't see it yet.
No, we can't see it, Jazz. Do you want me to share?
Yes, please, Charlotte.
There we go. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fab. So you'll just be able to use the tab at the top with the arrows to move along the workshop groups when the time comes. There's a gentle reminder of the circles at the top just to take into account your answers on a personal level, at a team level, and at an organisational level. If you run out of sticky notes, you can grab one from the left-hand side. And just be careful not to delete or write over somebody else's sticky notes. But let me post that for you now, that link, and we can go ahead into our breakout rooms. And just let me have 2 minutes to make sure you all have a facilitator who will ensure that your discussion, everybody gets a chance to speak and take some light notes. And that will be Vicky, Padraigeen, Senlika and Charlie Harris.
At this first section, then, this is really just, like I said before, to see how things are feeling on the ground at the moment, to get a real sense check of how it feels to as a speech and language therapist, but for people personally and professionally around this movement and where people are at, because a lot of people last year made some pledges about things they were going to do individually or in their teams. We just want to get a sense of how that is on the ground at the moment, so that we can measure about how useful this work is and know how to tailor make future events. So and also to share what's working with peers in Sussex, or what's not working, and ideas that we can overcome them in terms of barriers. So general taking stock. So if people can populate those jam boards as we're going in those discussions, that would be brilliant. So I'm going to hand over now to Senlika, who is going to lead the session on allyship. If Shah can put up Senlika slides.
Thanks a lot, Vicky. Once again, thank you everyone for being here today. I know some of you have attended previously, and for some of you, this is your first time. I'm Senlika Sterle, and this presentation has been created by both myself and my colleague Sahar. Unfortunately, Sahar couldn't join us today. We've gone for the curate, not create option with regards to this presentation, because there's great work being done on allyship and anti-racism in general worldwide. As Carmony mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information on the RCSLT workshop website, and NHS England as well have some information. So we've sort of steered away from the ones that are readily available, and we've taken a lot of the information today from the University of Alabama site. So if you want to look into that further, the details on the screen. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So what are we discussing today? We're going to be talking about what is an ally, why be an ally, and how can I become an effective ally? Next slide, please. This infographic is really, what does an ally look like? And it's to say that it could be anyone and it should be everyone. An ally is not a rescuer or a superhero. You're not rushing in to save the day or fixing things. And you're certainly not looking for social media likes and a photo op. Next slide, please. Why do I want to be an ally to marginalized people? So obviously all of the work that we're talking about and creating allyship is to support the marginalized community. So if you want to participate in righting injustices and building healthy communities, then you would want to be an ally. If you care about all people and advocate for others, you would want to be an ally. It's also about self-reflecting, unpacking your own unconscious beliefs and biases and trying to unlearn them through practice. And this says, by acknowledging disparities in healthcare, you can begin to be the same for all people. Most importantly, it's about acknowledging white privilege, about acknowledging the resources, knowledge, and skills that can help others. Next slide, please, Charlotte. We've come across lots of information on being an ally, and I'm going to talk a little bit further over the next few slides. This one is really about a simple snapshot just to address a few do's and don'ts about being an ally. So firstly, do listen openly, actively, and without judgment. Create that environment where your colleagues from BAME backgrounds feel that you do care just by listening. An important one is to acknowledge your bias, your privilege, and your history. And this is not about calling anyone out. It's just about simply acknowledging where you've come from and how you've gotten to where you are. Do accept discomfort. If it was easy, everyone would do it. And you'll see a theme going through about allyship, certainly about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Be a reference and a resource, and think about your network, what you can leverage and who you can connect and how. The don't bit is obviously something to keep in mind as well, in terms of not expecting others to do all the work. Choosing to take on the responsibility because of the community that you are supporting and all of the burden that has been placed on their shoulders over time. Please don't compare struggles. It's not a competition of who has it worse. It's not a competition of what's happened to you previously. It's just acknowledging that privilege and your history over time. Don't get defensive with anything. I think once we're practicing something that doesn't come naturally, we will make mistakes and therefore you will be called out. So please stay focused and please stay listening. Next slide, please. So this slide is credited to Giselle Buchanan. She is an activist, an educator, a creator, a poet, a multi-talented lady. And some of the information that she's given here is really practical, which is why we put it together to sort of review what should I do as an ally. We talked a lot about getting uncomfortable and what that means for everyone. It also means that a lot of people will not agree with you, that you will have conversations and arguments along the way. Getting uncomfortable will mean that you will have to bring up these conversations sometimes, even if you're not feeling that that's what you'd like to do at that moment in time. It is always about taking the responsibility and taking over some of that burden, and remembering that marginalized communities are not required to educate you. So while you are listening, don't ask them what to do, don't ask them how you can help, because they're tired. They've had a lot going on over the years, and they're also waiting for you to start helping and showing them how to lead the way. Some really practical bits are about creating a book club with your friends, creating or joining a group so that you can learn together, having the discussions that we are having today, seeking out the information individually and independently. And as I mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to be wrong. It's really difficult to be wrong if you just share plain facts. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So what should I do as an ally going further? Step back and provide the space so that everyone else can have an opportunity, so that you can amplify Black voices of minority communities, share opportunities for growth whenever you can, take care and educate yourself. So don't ask people to validate, educate, or comfort you. Step up and commit yourself to this work. I think we've heard the words that we're going on a journey from several people along the way, and this really is a journey, and today is about continuing that movement. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be quite a while in the making, but over that time, take those risks and hold yourself accountable for that. Also, just be that person who notices whose voice is left out, ignored, or devalued. Be that person who knows people's names and who talks respectfully, whoever you may be talking to, whatever level or hierarchy there is with that person, and be that person who leads by example, not by shaming others. Next slide, please. So in terms of continuing the movement, we want to change the priority, make anti-racism a priority at both the individual level, at the team level, and at an organizational level. By changing the priority, hopefully we can change the outcomes, and we can use privilege to give back. And I cannot stress enough about how it should be work that we should all engage in. Next slide, please. This is a list of recommended resources. So on the left, there are some books that you can refer to. And on the right, there are people and accounts to follow. There is a lot of information out there, like I said, whether it's books, whether it's groups, on social media. Seek them out, join them, and be part of continuing the movement. Speaking of social media, we'll go on to the next slide. So part of the breakout room discussion, what does it mean to be an ally, and specifically in the social media context? These quotes from social media say, we need more diversity in the profession. Then diverse people join the profession, and what happens is that they do not feel welcome or accepted, either because they have different ways of thinking, because of cultural beliefs and practices. And they feel that you've recruited them in order to push them out. this leads to diverse people leaving the profession. And what happens then is we say we need more diversity in our profession. So this is a cycle from social media that people have been talking about, figuring out ways to remedy this. And this is something that I'd love for everyone to discuss within the breakout rooms. And bearing this in mind, I'm just going to read from the next screen here, where it says, I've seen X comment and viewed some of the retweets that came off the back of it. I'm actually shocked at how much negativity there appears to be towards white females in the profession. I'm definitely not feeling on the same team vibe from any of it. So someone has responded to a social media debate that's ongoing. Some of you may have seen it. We're not going into the details of it, but these are just excerpts of the debate. RCSLT are looking into this and it is being addressed. One of the replies says, hi, I'm sorry you felt or feel attacked. I think the person you accuse of being aggressive may feel similarly attacked. Part of inclusive discussion is our role in acknowledging our power in a white-dominated profession and its roots, a power we hold that others don't. So as you can see, this is quite a heated discussion. It gets way more heated than what's presented here on the screen. I'd just like us to take this into account as we move into the breakout room discussion, not just on the level of anti-racism, but on the level of respect for our colleagues, respect for each other as human beings, and thinking a lot about what is the privilege, what is the bias, what is the history when some of this information is put on the screen. Saying that, I will hand over to Jazz to work her magic with the breakout rooms, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Padrino Flynn, and we'll be presenting this session with Derek Munn today on intersectionality in practice. And just before we get started, as Derek mentioned in our introductions, just want to shout out Ilya and Maya from the Anti-Racism Reference Group, who were massively helpful in helping us put this presentation together. Charlotte, if we could have the next slide, please. So we thought it would be best to just kind of start out with a base definition of intersectionality. So Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term, defines it as essentially a lens or a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality operate together and exacerbate one another. And she goes on to say that we tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender or class or sexuality or immigration status or other characteristics. But what's often missing from this analysis is how some people are subject to all of these. And that experience is not just the sum of its parts. I get the next slide, please. So yeah, just to continue defining and contextualizing intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw coined it in the 1980s. She was a Black feminist and critical race scholar. And it was originally rooted in the experiences of Black women in the US who were often excluded from feminist movements due to racism and from anti-racist movements due to misogyny. So it essentially provides us with a lens to understand how identities can overlap and how structural oppression is connected, which compounds the discrimination faced by minoritized communities. And it also helps us understand how people who hold multiple identities, when these identities might be viewed as separate from one another, or in some cases, opposing one another, might feel alienated from one or both or multiple of these groups and struggle to feel a sense of belonging. So it is the idea that discrimination that's faced by people who hold multiple oppressed or minoritized identities isn't just additive, but it's compounded. So to give an example, a disabled Black woman does not face just ableism plus the effects of racism, plus the effects of sexism. The ableism that she would face is made worse by sexism and racism, and that applies to all of those categories and any other minoritized characteristics that she might hold. So all of these intersections are connected within systemic discrimination, but intersectionality recognizes that because of this, there's not sort of a one size fits all when it comes to active change. So a systemic change, when we're focusing exclusively, for example, on racism, doesn't necessarily fix the problem of homophobia or sexism or transphobia. So one action won't solve everything, but we can recognize that different groups who hold different identities or combinations of identities will need their own spaces and their own support. Get the next slide.
Thank you, Patrick. That's really helpful. I think intersectionality is one of those concepts you hear around this stuff, like, you know, white privilege or indeed allyship, where you can be like, you know, I don't know what this means, and, you know, and as you know, Patrick has explained, basically, it's not a word to be scared of. It's not that complicated when you think about it. But I think that's a perfect part of the way you talk about it as a lens or a prism. So in practical terms, moving on to, because obviously you've already had a session in Sussex talking about active anti-racism, and we continue to talk about active anti-racism, but we're doing that alongside equality, diversity and inclusion in the round, and the interactions and complementarity between them. Now, give you the legal context. Actually, it's the legal context in England, Scotland and Wales. If, like me, you're a devolution geek, this is one of those bits of law that applies to England, Scotland, Wales, but not Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland has separate equality legislation to do with the particular traditions and history there. So, the Equality Act 2010. In a former life working in LGBTQ+ rights, I was involved in the passage of this legislation. It was the last Act of Parliament that was put through by the Labour government before Labour lost power to the Conservatives in 2010. And that's important for a reason I'll come back to. But first of all, I want to do a little quiz, either by unmuting yourselves or in the chat. There are 9 protected characteristics in law under the Equality Act. Can we name all 9 of them? Shout out or put it in the chat.
Sexuality.
Sexuality or sexual orientation, which, well, what's interesting, Marie, is a number of the terms come from 2010. And it's interesting to see how things have moved on. But yeah, sexual orientation is the term. I think it was possibly me that insisted on it. Disability, thank you very much. Have I missed any others in the chat aside from disability?
Yes, there's disability, faith, gender, age, ethnicity, sex.
Oh, someone's looking at the webpage. Yes, but not marriage and maternity. Yes, but not always with those words. I think we're not class. No, we'll come to that. So I think we're just missing one, so far as I
religion.
No, faith is there.
Oh, faith. Sorry.
It's pregnancy.
Pregnancy is with maternity. Okay, and the one we're missing, I can't believe it, in 2022. It's gender reassignment. So, if we click on the button, then we should get the wordings as they are in, here are the wordings as they are in the Equality Act. And I think this is instructive in the light of changes in 12 years and also in the light of some current debates. So age, disability. See, I don't think we would talk about gender reassignment now. And you'll be aware, not least because I'm aware I'm talking to Sussex, about the some of the challenges around, but gender's different, you see, Anne. So gender reassignment is what we would talk about trans, but obviously at the time it's very much in terms of a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which relates to some current debates. Marriage and civil partnership are together, pregnancy and maternity together, and those of you in HR will know that maternity gives you other rights even beyond the Equality Act. So the Equality Act works for both employment and for the provision of services. Obviously, being on maternity leave is the only thing that allows you positive discrimination in certain circumstances. Race, which again, would you choose that term now? But that's the term that's in the law. Religion or belief. Now, here's what's interesting, Anne. The term in the Act is not gender. The term is sex. And again, that relates to some current debates. And finally, sexual orientation. So I think that's all very interesting. It's important to remember that when we talk about a protected characteristic, everybody's got one, right? So it is theoretically possible for a cis, white, able-bodied, heterosexual male to experience discrimination in an individual case on the basis of one of these protected characteristics. I think the concept of intersectionality that Padra's begun to talk about talks about the structural forms of things. So can a white person, can a white man be discriminated against for being a white man? You can imagine an individual circumstance. But if you are talking about structural oppression, then you can start to see where the difference is. Okay, if you press the button again, we'll have a bit more about the legal background. Okay, so it's illegal to discriminate on any of these. I will talk about how they intersect. Now, somebody mentioned class. So these are in part 2 of the Equality Act. Part 1 of the Equality Act relates to socioeconomic disadvantage. Okay, now it's interesting. Last week we were, because we're all parliamentary geeks, we were watching live in our office as the Health and Care Act got royal assent in the House of Lords, which involved people reading out things in Norman French, saying La Reine de Verte, medieval Norman French, and that made the Health and Care Act an act. However, it still has to be commenced in the jargon. And the Equality Act, although it is an act, part 1, which is a duty on public bodies relating to socioeconomic disadvantage, was never commenced. Why? Because in the gap between the Equality Act being passed and coming into force, Labour lost power and the Conservative Party came in. And the Conservatives, as you might expect, chose not to implement the part of the Equality Act relating to socioeconomic disadvantage. However, in Wales, the Welsh Labour government have commenced the part 1 of the Act relating to socioeconomic disadvantage. Ask me questions later. Cool. Thank you very much. That's for me. But if you've got immediate questions, ask them now on this particular thing. Otherwise, back to Patrick.
Thanks so much for that, Derek. The parliamentary geek in me was very pleased with that explanation as well. So if we take a look at Sussex specifically, I have pulled some statistics on some of those key categories that Derek was just speaking about. So just as a slight disclaimer, because of where I was able to pull statistics from, not all of these are pulled from across the entirety of Sussex. So ethnicity is, but sex is just from East Sussex and Brighton and Hove, and then disability and sexual orientation are just from East Sussex based on the data that was publicly available. So when we look at these statistics, we can look at kind of this demographic data, right? And this is a lot of times pulled out about workforce, it's pulled out about the populations that you might serve. But how does it actually describe the populations that I'm using working with in sort of a dual meaning here, both that you're working with as colleagues and that you're working with as service users. So we might know that X% of the population holds X characteristics. So for example, 10% of the population is not white. But how do we kind of move, intersectionality asks, like, how do we move outside this silo mentality? So how much of that X%, so that 10% that are non-white, might also be disabled, might also be female, might also be LGBTQ, or hold any number of other oppressed or minoritized characteristics. So they will then be facing a unique form of discrimination that we're not seeing directly by looking at that one single statistic about ethnicity. If I could get the next slide, please. So then if we move forward to kind of then why is intersectionality important? Often when movements just focus on sort of one aspect of a person's identity or one specific minoritized characteristic, they leave out the most marginalized, which are going to be the folks in that community which hold multiple minoritized characteristics and multiple oppressed characteristics, because they're going to be facing the structural discrimination on multiple fronts. So intersectionality, though, is always a work in progress. So as we move forward, we're always looking and listening for new or hidden inequities or inequities that we haven't recognized before. So there's always kind of new things to be aware of. And intersectionality allows us to kind of build a solidarity based and a movement based on a shared commitment to resist structural discrimination and the ways that multiple types of oppression are connected, and the way that these types of violence are connected, rather than resisting one and then addressing another. If I get the next slide, please, I'll pass it back to Derek.
Okay, so as Kamini said at the outset, we have for a long time had a concern about equality, diversity and inclusion, both in the representativeness of our profession and in the services that we provide to our communities. And we've been bothered about it for a long time, whether it's class or whether it's whiteness. The 96% female one is interesting because if we think about the structural things, men are not an oppressed group, but in the context of speech and language therapy, there's been a lot of conversation about male SLTs or the lack of them. I have to say that although we took it very seriously and were passionate about it, we hadn't really cracked it. Yeah. And then the challenge of Black Lives Matter came along and rightly challenged us and rightly made us uncomfortable. And we had to respond. But I would say, and this is me speaking personally, that the challenge of Black Lives Matter has not only put us on the journey to active anti-racism, it has also galvanized us in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion across the piece. And I'm delighted that the new 5-year vision for the Royal College and the profession has as its first area of 8, equality, diversity, and inclusion. Now, the challenge of Black Lives Matter was saying it's not enough to be concerned about equality and diversity. You have got to be actively anti-racist and make that specific. Obviously, in the 2 years since, people have started to say, but we need to keep campaigning on sexual orientation. We've got to continue to be concerned about misogyny. We've got to continue to be concerned about disability. Yes, of course we have. But actually, that overall concern for EDI and the desire to be active anti-racism are complementary. They go hand in hand. And that's why you'll see going forward in Royal College documentation, references to both to equality, diversity and inclusion and to active anti-racism. And what, as Padra's been speaking about, intersectionality helps us see the structural discriminations which show why these can only be effectively tackled together. Thank you.
And just to provide y'all with a few further resources if you're interested. So these first 2 videos are quite short, just sort of introductions, bite-sized bits on intersectionality and intersectionality in public health. The second 2, just to put, again, a bit of a disclaimer, are from an American perspective, but they can be, like the principles are broadly applicable. So this third one is, it's a TED Talk by Kimberly Crenshaw about the importance of intersectionality. I did put a trigger warning on here though for police and state violence and misogynoir, just for information. And then the final one is an article about top tips for putting intersectionality into practice. So it's a good sort of just at a glance, things you can practically do. I get the next slide, please, which I believe is the discussion questions. So these are for your breakout rooms. You'll see then on the slide after this, and I think you, Jazz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you may have, oh, sorry, I'm just seeing a question in the chat. Oh, sorry, misogynoir is a particular form of misogyny experienced by Black women. So it's kind of the intersection of sexism and racism. Thanks for asking that. I didn't think to clarify. But yeah, so the discussion questions, I think you received the 2 wheels, the social identity wheel and the wheel of power or privilege, which are on the next slide. I think you received those beforehand. But yeah, if you wanted to, whether you wanted to share with the group or just keep it to yourself, just starting to think through your own identities, like Derek said, we all hold protective characteristics, whether or not some or all or none of those might be considered marginalized or might be structurally oppressed. We all hold those. So just thinking about your own kind of identity and how that impacts your perspectives and your attitudes. And then thinking about intersectionality for the communities that you serve and the service that you provide, as well as then what does it mean looking inwards towards your colleagues and towards yourself. I think that's it from us.
So we have the last 10 minutes. Is there anything anybody wants to, you don't feel we have to, but is there anything anybody wants to say? Kamini's here as well, join us again. Hi, Kamini, now known as Derek Munn. Is there any comments, reflections, thoughts anybody wants to share with the wider group before we do a final Jamboard? Any particular standout thoughts, reflections?
We were speaking in our group about the wheel, and I raised the idea or the comment around the being male, being in the power, and being female in the like disempowered bit. And I was sort of saying, well, if I'm such a minority gender in a female dominated profession, have I got the power in this situation? You know, if we're thinking about it professionally, and we were sort of talking a bit about that and saying some of the things that I've experienced as the occasional token male in services that I've worked in the past, and good, bad, and otherwise, and just saying, you know, it's an interesting thought because I don't know whether that's true or not, but I was just putting it out there that, you know, if you are a gender minority, are you still perceived as holding the power as a white male? I'm not sure. But yeah, we spoke around that for a bit. I don't know if anybody's got any other thoughts or experiences that they think that agree or disagree, or
I feel like context is really important, you know, and those things can't be seen as completely fixed, and they will change depending on, because you can be in a smaller group, can't you, within the wider society, and maybe in that smaller group then I was just thinking, somebody said that they felt like marginalized by having children, and that because you were at a disadvantage in terms of childcare. And I was thinking, actually, I feel like sometimes having children it gives you privilege, because you know, you're then seen in a certain way by other people that have children, and if you haven't got children, then you're marginalized from that. So I think context is important sometimes.
The summary of our group was, it was incredibly complicated and very interesting and really important. And then I think we struggle with the and then what question, in terms of actually with this knowledge and this I don't know if you've got any answers, Padraig or Derek, but that sense of, you know, is we found it really interesting, but it was quite hard to think about what to put on the Jamboard. Given we only have 7 minutes left, I'm going to say thank you very much to all the organisers and presenters today, and thank you all so much for coming. It's just been fantastic to have 40 people thinking about this, and I'm really struck. Unfortunately, Karen's had to leave. She was a student from Birmingham, and I don't think she'd mind me saying, but she joined a group and she was saying to our group how amazing it was to see so many white people talking about anti-racism. That was in the context of allyship, and how she found that it was her first experience of that, and how brilliant she found that. So I just wanted to reflect that back. It was really lovely to hear those words. But so I want to say thank you very much for everyone to come. Can we now then end this with people filling in on the general Jamboard now? I guess what we think we should do next, what you want to do individually, what you might take from this and want to do in your own workplace or in your own personal life, what ideas you might have that we can do as a team, and then particularly organisational level, or I guess on a Sussex level, what we might want to do next. Don't worry too much about being constricted by the different boxes in those questions. What we really want to know is, where are you at? Where are we at as a profession? What can we do more of? What are our next steps? Corinne, the Jamboard, if we can put the link in again, Jazz, is a board of post-it notes, electronic post-it notes that you can move things around. It's quite intuitive, Corinne, when you see it. Yeah, next steps for you, next steps for us, some guidance as to what we might want to do next in what I think will be a series of events, and the work that we hope we'll do with NHS England. But thank you all. And then when you've written on your Jamboard, please feel free to leave and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I hope you aren't all going to work too hard and you can finish at 4.